Hello, everyone. Welcome to week number 3 in Science 200. This week will be all about learning how to read a scientific article and determining whether it is reliable and credible. So we'll see how that goes. First of all, let's do a quick review of the last 2 weeks. So in the last 2 weeks, you have been learning about how science works and how important investigation is and coming up with good questions and just sticking to it until you are sure of the answer. You learned about Alexander Fleming and his discovery of penicillin that first week and how he really did discover this miraculous chemical that could be used inside a body to kill bacteria. But then he stopped his investigation there, and other scientists had to carry it forward to figure out how to grow this type of fungus in culture and then how to isolate the chemical penicillin in order to use it as an antibiotic. You also learned about the work of John Snow, the famous medical doctor in London, who definitively showed that cholera, the disease which causes a horrific type of diarrhea, that it is transmitted through infected and contaminated waters. Usually that contamination is through sewage contamination that contains feces from infected people. So he showed how cholera is transmitted through his work, which was very important because the main understanding of transmission of diseases in that time was through miasma, which is putrid or nasty smelling vapors in the air. And they thought all diseases were transmitted that way. And of course, we know now that that is not the case. So anyway, he started this understanding of different ways of transmission of diseases. This week, you are going to learn how to use scientific sources. You're going to learn how to read a scientific paper. You're going to examine the sections. And you will do this by looking at an example of a journal article published on the Flint, Michigan water problem, where the water supply caused leaching of lead into the water supply, and many children drank this water. Many children have been harmed by the lead that was found in that water. So it's a horrific public health issue that happened in Flint, Michigan, and there are repercussions to that still. But this is a scientific article about that issue. I want to mention a couple of things about the sections of a scientific article. The most important one is the abstract, because the abstract is a little bit of everything. We try to keep it to about 250 words or less, so it really is a compilation of everything that's contained in that journal article. So you have the basic question, you have basic background information about why this topic is important. You have the specifics of how this was investigated, how it was tested through experimentation, what the results look like, what they meant, and what the future will hold for this particular topic. So the abstract is terribly important. And I will tell you, you need to look at the abstract in order to figure out whether you have a relevant article. And relevant means, does this pertain to the topic that you're interested in, right? So the abstract, looking at the abstract will help you figure that out. The introduction gives you a lot of background information about your topic, and it also raises the question that's going to be answered in this study. Methods, of course, is how the experiments were done, how the research was done. This should be in enough detail where another scientist could take this information and redo this work. So that's important. And then you have the results section. So you have lots of experimentation that's done, lots of research that's done, and then the results are compiled in the form of tables, in the form of graphs, if at all possible. Anytime you have data, you should not just present raw data in tables. So the data is gathered up, compiled, averaged, whatever you need to do, statistically analyzed, that's also important, and presented in tables and graphs, hopefully Sometimes it just has to be a narrative, but a lot of the time you can put these in graphs, different kinds of graphs, bar charts, line graphs, etc., and tables. So that's the results section. The discussion section is sometimes lumped in with the conclusion section. I know what your textbook says, but a lot of the time there's not a separate conclusion section. So the discussion is the meaning of all of this. What is the meaning of the results that you got? What does this mean in the overall scheme of things? How do we interpret this? Wait a minute, how do you interpret your results? And what are the future questions that this brings up? What are the future studies that need to be done? That's the discussion and conclusion section. So that's how you read a scientific paper, and you're going to get practice with that. You're going to learn how to find credible and relevant sources, and I talked about relevant when I mentioned the abstract. Credible means, is this good work? Is it done by scientists who have good reputations? And one other thing to think about is, and always look at the end of an article, who is paying for the research? Because sometimes, of course, that's going to influence the results that someone gets in their experiment. So look who's paying for the research. If it's NIH, the National Institutes of Health, then you're pretty well guaranteed that that is pure scientific work that's being done. Also, you're going to find 3 good sources through the Shapiro Library for your topic. And it's kind of interesting. So I did a check of the Shapiro Library to see if what I had written, what my research that's out there, could be found through the Shapiro Library. And a couple of things that I've written did come up in the Shapiro Library. But I will also tell you that more of them came up in Google Scholar. So don't forget something like that is a resource also. The Shapiro Library is awesome because you can get the complete text of a lot of articles that you normally can't get on something like Google Scholar. But there's Google Scholar, and there's also PubMed, like publication of medical issues, but it really doesn't mean that because it's all kinds of science. PubMed is another good database that you can search. So you're going to find 3 good sources on your topic, and you are going to evaluate those sources. Are they credible? Good science behind them? Reputable people who are doing the work? It's not a paid study where you expect to get certain results. And is this relevant to your particular topic? So that's what you're going to be doing this week. Then also, you have a section in your textbook as you work through Chapter 3 on plagiarism. And plagiarism is an important idea that you need to understand, and that's taking someone's work and presenting it as your own. And this is one reason that your work, for example, the assignments, have to be turned in through that software called Turnitin. That double checks your work to see if it matches anything else in the database. And it is, I don't even know how many documents are in there. But everything that comes into SNHU is put into Turnitin. And also documents from all across the world for years now has been input into Turnitin. And they double check your work. And if similarities show up, it shows up in your score. And you can always see that score. So if you see a high score, if you see something above 70%, you need to be checking that to find out what the heck is going on. Plagiarism also consists of you turning in your very own work that you may have turned in for another course. So be very careful about things like that. If you've done a report on ocean acidification before, and that's what you're going to do in this class, make sure that you are writing that fresh and that you aren't just turning in work that you've done previously, because that definitely will show up too, and that is also plagiarism. Okay, then you have discussion board posts this week in week 3. You don't have discussion board postings every week, but this week you do. So after you have gone through your textbook, after you have looked up your 3 good sources, This is what you will be discussing in your initial post. What was your biggest challenge in analyzing a scientific source? And I will tell you right off the bat, for me, it is the jargon, especially if it's a branch of science that isn't exactly my forte. Like if I were looking up an article on something in botany, yeah, I'd have to be looking up a lot of jargon because scientific jargon, each branch of science has its own language, and genetics is the biggest one, the largest data bank of extra information and extra language would be in genetics. So the jargon sometimes is hard to get through because you don't know what the terminology means, and so you have to look it up. But when you do that, then you can figure out what's going on. But there are other issues that you're going to have too when you start analyzing a scientific source. How did you overcome this? So your biggest challenge, how did you overcome this? And use a couple of examples. Say, oh, when I looked up ocean acidification and I went to the NOAA website and I found this article, then I didn't understand what pH even was. Okay, so that's one example. Your 2 response posts. Okay, the initial discussion board post is due by Thursday. This is true for every week that you have discussion board postings. The initial post is due by Thursday night before midnight. Your 2 response posts are due by Sunday. Compare your challenges to your classmates' challenges. Are there similarities? I bet there are. Are there differences? Could be. Share your tips. Any tips that you have for analyzing this type of source so that we can all get a better understanding of how this works. And then finally, my tip of the week is to use what you learned in the textbook to answer the discussion board questions. You have to do the work in the textbook first in order to even understand what the discussion board postings are about. So make sure you get going in the first part of the week. Do your textbook work in chapter 3 and find your 3 sources. And when you get practice at reading those sources, then you can answer the questions for the discussion board post. And follow directions anytime you are completing your examples, your assignment. Sorry about that. So I just finished in this past week you finding out your topic and describing the significance of it. Now, when you see words like describe the topic that you have chosen, okay, describe means to fully explain. It doesn't mean I chose genetic engineering because it's interesting. Nope. What the heck is genetic engineering? You're introducing this idea to an audience when we get to the end of the term. So you've got to explain what genetic engineering is and why this is an important topic. And the significance of it, that also has to be fully explained. It's not a list of things. It's explaining why this particular topic is an important one. And of course, SNHU and also the Sumo web text people have put together, I think it's 6, maybe it's 8, really good topics that are relevant today, that are current topics in the news all the time. So why is this significant? Why in the world are we talking about electric cars? Why is biodiversity conservation important in the world? Who cares? Who in the world cares if we have biodiversity in ecosystems? So the significance. So what I'm saying is read the directions and use those words in the directions as clues. So when you see describe, explain, that is not one sentence. That is a full paragraph where you're fully discussing a topic. Okay, and if you ever have any questions or you get stumped by anything, please let me know. I'm here for you to help you work your way through this course. Dr. Janie Sigmon, m.sigmon@snhu.edu. Please email me and I will get back to you as quickly as I can. With that being said, I hope that you have a wonderful week this week.